Everybody all set?
I haven't got one.
I don't know, maybe he owns the right of way, the same as the rights to use it.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. I'm Paul Chansky. This is a public meeting. Unless we actually vote to go into executive session, you're entitled to hear everything that is said and look at any exhibits that might be presented. We just have one item on our agenda this evening. The applicant will go first and state his case, subject to any questions that we might have. Then any other interested parties will have an opportunity to speak, to be heard. And, again, subject to any questions the board might have. And then we'll give the applicant one more opportunity in case something came up that he would like to address. And at that point, we'll close the public comment section, and then the board will discuss and decide the matter. You're welcome to stay for that. The decision will be committed to writing and sent to the applicant within 7 days. I mean, you should know the decision tonight, and we can go from there. With me on the board this evening, immediately to my left, Steve Leal, Ray Reimer, and John Bell. Also for the town, Leo Rachin is attorney for the board, Wendy Lake, secretary for the board, and Jim Nagel is the town code enforcement officer. Any questions on what we're gonna do? Okay. Then turn it over to the applicant. Go ahead and
Name is Jason Labonte, I'm the builder of the project. So basically, we had placed the house to what we thought was well within the setback. We were under the assumption that the road was a 50-foot right-of-way. Later we had learned after a bank survey was done that there is a short stretch of road right there that is actually a 66-foot right-of-way that used to serve the bridge over a railroad bed, which is now the Eastern Trail. In light of the new information, I had sent my own surveyors out there to verify the setbacks and actually get it a little more precise, considering the first survey was just a simple boundary survey. So we did a full survey to get right down to the inch of exactly what we were looking at, if it was maybe perhaps a mistake that we were hoping. At that point, then, that's when we learned that there was a 66-foot right-of-way in the road, which threw off a lot of our calculations on that short piece of road. So after that, basically, we are clearly outside of the setback perimeter. The foundation's 3.5 feet, including overhang, is 4.5 feet on the front right-hand corner. Approximately 6 inches with the overhang of 1 foot 6 inches on the left corner of the house. So basically, we're here in front of you today, asking to see if we can get a setback variance for the 3.5 feet plus the 1 foot overhang, which would be a 4.5 feet on the right hand side, versus having to cut the front of the garage off, which I don't see any reason why the additional 3.5 feet of a garage would hinder outside of a setback area, given there's already a 50-foot setback. The zoning out there has been changed to a smaller net acreage requirement out there, but yet the setbacks haven't been changed. So I was hoping, given that the right-of-way is a lot bigger than standard, we already have quite a bit distance coming off the existing road. And wondering if you could do, if you could grant us that variance for it. It's pretty minimal. We're in the sidewalk, standing inside the garage, and when you draw a straight line, I mean, you're talking an arm length. Over a 50-foot requirement, which in this particular instance is actually 58, from the center line, not from the center line of the road, but actually, from when it would be normally. So if it would have been a 50-foot right-of-way in that road, we would have been well within setback. But a lot of extra, to spare. So given where it's just a short section of road that even has that, where everybody else can actually get closer to the road, because the road right of way is a lot smaller, where our road right of way is a lot larger. We're just as far back of the road as what anybody else would be. We're just not meeting that setback because the road right of way is a lot larger. So we're just asking for that, 3.5 feet, which is very minor, when you look at the large scheme of things.
Anyone have questions for Jason?
Jason, how come you didn't do the survey before you built the house instead of calling the surveyor in when the problem became apparent? Wouldn't it have made a lot more sense to have that lot surveyed so that you knew exactly what you were dealing with?
We had found some monumentations on the other side of the road, that were meeting, a lot of dimensional, not requirements, but dimensions of what other lot lines. So we had researched, what everybody's distances and lot sizes were supposed to be and road frontages, and everything was checking out. And when we pulled across the road and went to the 50 feet, we had looked at, a bunch of tax maps, everything looked great, everything looked like it was consistently 50 feet through there. So when we had pulled all those measurements, we were pretty for sure that we were well within the parameters. That we would have been we weren't close, we thought that we were well within inside of it and gave ourselves, an extra 5-6 feet. But, then in lieu of this new, this area that it became 66 feet for that short stretch of road, it threw all our calculations off. So we didn't just kind of go out there and just kind of guess. We pulled a lot of measurements off the monumentation that we found out there, and everything seemed to be checking out. What threw us off was the 66-foot right-of-way was definitely something we didn't plan, which for us, that's a whole 16 feet. So given, that we're 4.5 feet off, if we would have had that 50-foot right-of-way, that extra 16 feet would have put us about 12 feet behind the setback line, which is what we had thought. So we had given ourselves quite a bit more extensive, but because it's 66 feet, it threw us all off, and now we're 4.5 feet with the overhangs off.
So you wouldn't have had the full 16 feet to work with, would you? If the right-of-way was an extra 16 feet, that would only be 8 feet on either side of the road.
We didn't measure from the center line of the road, we were actually measuring from monumentation on the other side of the road. So we lost the whole side 16 feet. So we weren't exactly going by, because the roads can vary, within the right of way. They don't necessarily mean that they're dead center in the roads. So the monumentation we're going by is for the opposite side of the right of way. So that's where we got kind of thrown off. It was a super huge learning curve for us. Obviously, major right-of-way, state roads and stuff like that. But, we have looked at quite a few maps, and nothing was presenting that the road would get wider in that section. So, we were just taking into account that the road was consistently the same all the way straight through.
When you did have a surveyor in there, he obviously came up with the fact immediately that the right-of-way, was gonna be a problem.
Yes, he did.
So I assume that somewhere in the records, it must have showed that there was a 66-foot.
Yeah, they had to go back series, I don't know exactly how many years, but they had to go back quite a ways to the point where it's actually describing the right of way in rods, which is something they haven't done in quite a few decades now. But that is how they found it. Of course, that was so far back that that's when it was the old railroad bed and actually had the bridge is when they actually created those. But yeah, that was pretty much, they're the ones that actually kind of brought it to our attention to say, that right of way gets wider than that. So that was a huge surprise for us.
What does right of way actually mean or measure?
So a right of way is basically, so you got, all your roads are typically built in 50-foot right of ways. So all your subdivisions, and any roads that we typically build, cities take over, even a lot of your private roads, are all built within 50-foot right of ways. And so a road might only be 24 feet wide, but it's built within that 50-foot right of way. So basically it's a strip of land that the city actually owns.
So is half of it on each side of the center of the road? I'm just trying to understand.
It is, yeah, the road, I mean, now that we've
Okay.
done some really strategic,
So a
you know,
66
surveying and.
Foot right of way would mean, all right, 33 feet from the middle of the road on either side.
Yeah, and it doesn't always go that way, okay, so, cause the road might not necessarily be in the middle of that right of way. So some roads, especially on corners and stuff like that, they'll vary left and right throughout those right of ways. So a lot of times, that's why the city is able to do ditching and stuff like that without people saying, you're on my property. Just cause the
Okay.
pavement stops, it doesn't mean the city doesn't
And
own it.
setback is measured from where?
From the property line, edge of right of way and property line, so the individual's properties are all to the edge of the right of way. So it doesn't stop at the edge of the pavement, it goes to the edge of the right of way, so because this right of way is larger, the property line is further off the pavement.
Okay, so setback is measured from
The property.
the
The
right,
property line.
Edge of the
Yeah.
right of way.
the right of way.
Yes, it's the edge of right of way, not the edge of pavement. So in this particular
Okay.
case, we have, the pavement's only about 12 feet from center line. The actual right of way is 33. So in this particular case, I mean, we have 21 feet from the pavement before we even get to the edge of that right of way. Which is, on this particular instance, 8 feet more than standard.
Okay,
But
thank
it's
you.
significantly a lot more.
One of the things I noticed at the site walk was that the utility poles, there's two close to the property, vary markedly in distance from the pavement. And usually, not always, but usually the utility poles are put close to the edge of the right of way. It's the typical position. And the difference is quite marked actually between the one on the Eastern Trail side, which is well back from the carriageway, from the paved section, to the next one up, which is quite close to it. Did that not raise a question mark at the early stages? Because I suspect what CMP have done is taken advantage of that 66 foot to push the pole over a bit. And I just wondered if it even occurred to you that that might be, what's going on here moment.
Poles are pretty much placed, so you can put poles on private property. CMP has probably millions of easements out there now.
Yeah,
But anytime, like when we're doing subdivisions or anything like that, they'll typically, if we need to run a pole across somebody's property, whether it's an aerial easement or whether it's actually a pole that's set into the ground, a lot of times we'll just give them the easement, because obviously it's a lot easier just to run a line across corner,
yeah,
than to sit there and put an additional pole and make a 90-degree bend or whatever it is. Being it's on a curvature of the road, and we don't know like how long those poles have been there. So those poles could have been placed, prior to, where the right-of-way might have been years ago, or who knows what they did 50 years ago, because so many things happened even 30, 40 years ago before there were so many requirements required by the towns. A lot of things really changed back in like 1980 to 1990 with a lot of towns. We see, private road standards and this and that and everything. So the shorter answer for your question is CMP poles are pretty much everywhere from private to public, so it's really hard to judge what CMP may or may not have done, 20, 30, or 60 years ago. So it doesn't typically raise a red flag to anybody.
no, though an easement would have shown up on the tax map, I think. Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it?
An easement?
For a pole to be on private property. Might or might not,
Probably not.
might or might not.
I guess I differ with Mr. Levante here. I mean, I pretty much assume that most utility poles, whether they're telephone or AT&T
Yeah,
or CMP birthmark poles are 9 times out of 10 are in the public right of way.
yes, that's what I was wondering.
Towns get a tax revenue from
That's absolutely.
I have a question. Jason, so this might be redundant, but I just wanna kinda get a better understanding from you that why were you ignorant of the fact of the 66 feet requirement there? What did you miss?
I guess we typically don't do title searches on roads. You know, that's basically what would be required to actually know that information, is to actually go back and title, to actually know that these roads are 66 feet. So like when we bought the property, we have title searches done on all the properties that we buy. You know, and none of them will tell you, you know, that this is attached to a 66-foot right-of-way, or if it's attached to a 50-foot right-of-way. You know, we basically do the title searches for the properties. And roads, they got their own title searches. And, you know, with, I mean, I've built probably close to 300 houses, and, you know, nobody's ever brought up, you know, what a right-of-way of a road is, or a title of it, or how do you come up with that?
So you know, Jason, I'm not an engineer, or, you know, I'm not as well versed as some of the gentlemen on, you know, here, sitting here. So I'm gonna ask you another question. I heard John say something about surveying the property, okay? So that seems to be poignant in this, why you're here. Is that done incorrectly, or was that not done properly? How were you supposed to have this, in other words, I'm trying to find out from you, what went awry? I mean, what was it that you didn't have the information, or what did you do that caused this? It's minimal, but it's problematic.
Right, so most builders out there will typically, you know, we have enough information on our fingertips, to actually figure out where the corners are and stuff like that and everything. We typically won't spend that $2,000-3,000 to have a survey done. You know, and a lot of it's just cost, you know, and it's easy. I know a lot of people say, you just pass it on to the homeowner. And that's really easier said than done, you know, because there's a lot of times, we're building houses, we have to have appraisals met. We have to have other builders that we're always competing with, and not all builders will build to certain standards. You know, so they're already cutting costs a lot lower than a lot of builders would like to do. You know, so we always have this competition, we always have to try to meet appraisals. So we're always trying to skip that cost, okay? And 99% of the time, we can. You know, the parcels are big enough, we have enough information, we can find enough monumentation out there. We can pull measurements with all the information that we have. Like I said before, I built 300 houses, and I got bit. And, you know, but it's not like something like, you know, where this is a common thing, that could be messed up either. You know, if you do enough homework, you can typically figure it all out, and it usually works out extremely well. And we've never had any issues in the past. You know, this one here was a little bit of a different scenario, you know, given, you know, the information that we basically kind of missed, for one, and the rarity of it. You know, being such a short portion of the road, it's not like Route 1 where the whole entire road would be 66
Right.
feet. You know, it's just a, you know, a short section of the road. You know, talking to the Public Works Director at the last meeting, that we had, he had mentioned there was about a 500-foot section. I didn't really verify that, that's just kind of hearsay,
That's it.
but it's a pretty small section considering my property frontage is like 320. You know, so basically it's my property and the neighbors, that only have this hindering on us right now.
Okay, it makes it more clear for me, yeah.
So, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yes, I'm curious about this, partly because I just bought a piece of land, and we wouldn't have bought it if it hadn't been surveyed before we bought it, and with the boundaries clearly defined, and in fact that revealed a problem, a very minor problem that I don't need to go into, but it's just as well we did. And sure, there's a small cost involved, but the vendor bore the cost because he wanted to sell the land, in that particular case. I'm really surprised to hear that you didn't have the boundaries, the corner points, and that's not a straight frontage, so it may have a kink in it somewhere. Didn't have that actually nailed down. Presumably there weren't, actual corner markers, rebar or posts or whatever on that site, were there? Is there any actual definition of the corners of the lot?
No, we had everything surveyed as originally when it was split, it was all surveyed on paper and split up correctly and everything. And
Yeah, but then, in which case you should have distances and bearing lines from fixed markers.
Yeah, there was, I had walked with the person that we had bought the land from and kind of verified, you know, whereabouts everything was. And we had found a monument on the other side of Trailside Circle, where that's a 50-foot right of way. And we had pulled over there, so we knew where the sideline was. And then we had to figure out like where the other side and stuff like that. So all the sidelines and stuff like that, we were pretty accurate with that. The only thing we didn't have was exactly how far off the road it was, because we were using the monumentation on the other side.
Okay, right, I understand.
So we had a pretty clear picture as far as exactly how it was all laid out, you know, using the monumentation that we had, and that's why we didn't go and spend $2,000-3,000 for a survey, because we thought we had it all 100% figured out, given everything, all the monumentation that we found. I mean, we did find, you know, 6-7 other pins out there, and everything, when we pulled all the points, everything matched up perfect. You know, with the sidelines, we went 50 feet, and we went 320 down the other side, we found the pin up on the other side. Everything was calculating perfect, so we're sitting there and we're saying, you know, we're only missing a couple pins, everything else is working out perfect. This shouldn't be an issue at all. Measuring, you know, the 50 feet for the right of way, we have more than enough. We're gonna push the house back a little bit further, just to be on the safe side. And, you know, the 16 feet's a huge amount. It's not like, you know, that right of way was just 5 or 10 feet bigger. That extra 16 feet really threw a wrench in the gears and clipped us right onto the corner of that garage.
Yep.
And like I said, it's a very short section of road, so you really have to get into the titles of the road in order to find that.
You keep saying it's a very short section, how long this section of road?
I don't know the exact length. Last meeting I had, when I was at the, when I had talked to the council members, public works director was there and everything, he brought up that it was about 500 feet. I don't know that 100% for sure.
'Cause your paperwork references 1,000 feet.
I'm guessing 1,000 between both directions. So, because you get the eastern
500
trail,
feet,
so I'm
okay,
thinking.
So we're talking 500 feet in either direction
Direction.
from the
Right.
house, or 1,000 feet.
Right.
And that's nothing that's changed recently, I take it. This extra width on the right of way isn't something that was put into effect last week or last month, or?
No, I wouldn't think so, no.
Any other questions?
No.
Yeah.
Care to,
Yeah, I just, I.
have some
I
input,
questions.
please?
Just so that I can understand I understand codes in towns, right, but what's the general reason for a standard setback? Is it for aesthetics or safety or combination or just, I just don't.
Think with the wrong people to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you want an answer to that, you really ought to go talk to the planning
Planning
board.
board,
Because
yes.
they are the
Okay.
ones that come up with all of
I
these
think a combination
specifications.
is a reasonable,
Yeah, I was gonna
interpretation,
say.
but, yeah, they're
That's
absolutely right.
right.
You wanna be far enough,
The planning board would, be able to speak to that
right?
better than we could.
Okay, and so is and what I'm hearing is it's not a standard setback on every road, like Jason
Correct.
said something, right, cause Route 1's a busier road, so that's got a wider setback for safety purposes. And maybe you have a shorter setback on
I think that it is pretty standard, isn't it, Jim? But,
Well, I mean, it varies by neighborhood,
By
it varies
neighborhood.
by the zone. If you wanna talk about Route 1, a very interesting thing is Route 1 is actually an 80-foot wide right of way.
80 foot,
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me.
wider for
Yeah.
safety.
and that makes
Um,
sense.
And, you know, I mean, I'm sure the state of Maine anticipated that as a main thoroughfare.
Right.
Probably
Yeah.
years before the I-95 corridor. But, nonetheless, it remains a 80-foot wide right of way. And, VIP learned that because because they wanted to place a sign there, and I wouldn't give them a permit for that. Because that would be a billboard, wouldn't it, be off-premise
Mhm.
signage, so there was a major debate about that many years ago. Other neighborhoods, such small subdivisions would be a 25-foot setback.
So what, I mean, is the setback a relatively new, cause I'm like that house right there was on Limerick Road and it's 22 feet from the road, right? So is it,
Sure,
Is
I mean,
it-
there are houses that predate zoning,
Yeah.
so if
Gotcha,
the
okay.
houses predate zoning,
their grandfather?
they're basically legally non-conforming, yeah.
Okay,
So, you know, if you took any house that was built post-Civil War,
sure.
pre-70s in this community, they're helter skelter, and that's true probably throughout all of rural New England.
Right. So then is all of Limerick Road 50 feet except for that section right there?
No, it is not, it varies up and down the entire length of the road.
It does, okay.
Yeah, it does.
Which
And
is
it's based
typical
on
of
the
old
intensity.
roadways,
Yeah.
incidentally, isn't it?
You know, based on the intensity of
But
building.
it- oh,
Yeah, some
okay.
places have sidewalks,
Right,
right? And those are clearly in the public right of way.
Right.
So,
okay. And so it's new information, so that particular short section of road differs from the rest of the road around it because the town wanted a little bit of, I'm guessing, wanted a little bit of extra access so that they could service the bridge that used to be there,
I'm sure that was probably a good part of the thought process.
but the bridge is no longer there. So it doesn't really need to be 66 feet, it probably should have been changed years ago to 50 to match the rest of the.
I don't think it's that easy to just discontinue a portion of a public right of way. You know, it's
Fair enough.
easy in conversation.
Sure, yeah, I'm thinking it through from a logical
Yeah.
layman, not like,
But
it
the-
was
the
66 feet for a reason, that reason no longer exists.
But there might be other reasons, such as the railroad, got transformed into the Eastern Trail.
Right.
So you might want an extra wide right-of-way, for instance, to provide for parking for people using the Eastern Trail.
Right.
Just because the railroad discontinued, doesn't logically follow that the right-of-way ought to be narrow.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's also true that there's a gas pipeline runs along under the Eastern Trail.
Right.
And so that wider right-of-way allows room for access from maintenance trucks, et cetera, to be got in to deal with the pipeline if it needs dealing with. So there might be multiple reasons why it's stayed at 66 feet.
Right.
Rather than,
To match the rest of them,
Yeah.
yeah.
rather than just matching.
Good question.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to, again, I'm not an expert on these things, but, I mean, the house, as I see it, right, is just as far back as, or further than what the neighbor's house would be, right? Which means it meets the aesthetic and safety requirements that the town has, because it's just as far back as the neighbor next to him, and the neighbor next to him, and the neighbors on the other side, right?
I'm not
Just that-
sure that that's actually true.
Well, if it's 500 feet and we've got,
You say the setback is, but if you drive down the road, I think you will notice that most of the other houses are set back quite a bit further.
oh, sure, but that's by choice, I'm just saying from,
Yeah,
It-
by
it-
choice.
if the neighbor, right, wanted to build their house, they could easily build the house at the exact same distance from the road as our house.
That wasn't what you said.
Well, I guess that was what I was trying to, I mean, there is no neighbor, right? There's no neighbor to our left. If there were, like, theoretically a neighbor there's a lot there, they could build their house at the exact same distance from the road that our house is built, even closer, actually, which would mean so it has the exact same safety and aesthetic
Well,
situation as ours.
not if that wide right-of-way extends 500 feet on either side of your house, which has been what we've been told tonight. You would have to go 500 feet away from your house and.
Right, well, I think our
closer to
frontage is
the road.
320, and then there's, Trailside Drive, and then there's a
Okay,
lot
so
over there,
320 divided
so-
by 2 is 160, so 160 from 520, you're looking at
No,
about 360. You could go to the edge of your property and go another 360 feet
What?
before the road gets narrower.
no, because we have 320 feet on one side of the Eastern Trail. So if it's only 500 feet on one side of the eastern trail, that's only another 180 feet. There's Trailside Drive, which is 60 feet, right?
Okay.
So there's only another 120 feet there. So if they built their house, in theory, they could build their house the exact same distance as us if their driveway was, you know,
Okay, so now we're not saying that the right-of-way extends 500 feet either side of the house.
Yeah, right.
We're
No, it's
saying
not
that
house,
it
it's the
extends 500 feet
the
either side
trail.
of the eastern
trail,
trail.
correct,
Yes.
Correct.
yes.
Okay, which is a different
Yes,
thing.
it's
than
500 feet either side of the
Of
eastern
the eastern
trail.
trail.
Right, yeah, no, because there's a thousand total, 500 each side of the eastern trail, because the eastern trail was where the bridge was, because they used to be the old railroad bed. So everything got spread both ways, so they had to fill extensions for the bridges and stuff like that, and everything was the reason why they had it wider. And I think what Jeff is saying is that, you know, this house placed where it is, you know, even if it was 600 or even 1,000 feet down the road, the neighbor 1,000 feet down the road that way and 1,000 feet down the road the other way have the ability to pull their house closer to the road than we are, and not have an issue because there's only 50-foot right-of-ways down the other ends, versus where we are, we're entitled to be further back because of this.
So I'm just saying that our house where it is meeting the aesthetic and safety requirements or efforts that any house a little further closer to here or a little further away would have.
It's just
Yeah.
not meeting the setback requirements.
I know,
for
but
the
that's
zone
it.
we're in.
It just seems like a,
Which is why we're here tonight.
sure, I mean, there's common sense, right, which is what I'm talking about, and then there's non-common sense, which it doesn't, you know, to me, it doesn't make any sense, right? I'm a common sense kind of guy, I guess.
Well, I totally sympathize with your argument, I
Right.
do, but there's ordinances, and there's, you know, what's on the books.
Sure.
And therein, you know,
Sure.
this is why we're here, you know,
Yeah.
like he said.
Well, I think part of the reason the zoning board is here is to understand the issue and apply some common sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't need you guys, right? If you only went by the letter of the law every time, you wouldn't need a zoning board of
Well,
appeals.
you wouldn't need a
I
variance.
would have to object to that.
I'm sorry?
To the chair, I would have to object to that. That is not the board's position, is to apply common sense. It's to apply the criteria dictated in chapter 11
That's
for
what
the
I'm
granting of
looking at.
variance. And, you know, it's
See, we
it's
have
great
to go by
to
this.
think that that's what it was common sense, but unfortunately, I think the town's attorney might agree with me that that is not the intent.
Yeah,
And
so,
to keep the field level, this criteria was created, so it's, the review process is the same here as is in Dover, Foxcroft, and
Right.
Glenwood.
and I think that's important to point out, is that these variance criteria are statutory. While they certainly are in the town's ordinances, they are based on state statute. And, so it's not like the town of Arundel or the town meeting or the planning board pulled these out of the air. They're very much, long in the tooth, tried and true, I don't wanna say tried and true, but they are statutory requirements that essentially are cut and paste from state statute into the town's ordinances. And, you know, I think that the public hearing portion has not closed, and you have your questions to ask, and I think part of the procedure is to have the code enforcement officer make a presentation as well. But once, as far as procedure goes, once the public hearing portion is closed, to, you know, just to reiterate Jim's point, that your charge this evening is basically to look at the very clearly articulated, variance criteria, and basically look at those questions, and make a determination based on the fact that you have been presented, whether or not they are met. And that is, I know it sounds very basic, it's very easy to say that's your job, it's a lot harder to do your job, but that is what exactly, you know, I mean, it's basically threading the needle. What is the criteria? Is it met? If so, why? If not, why not? And that's what we do once the deliberations portions of the evening starts, but we're still in the fact-finding portion.
Well, understood, is that
Yeah.
helpful? Anything else you would like to, tell us?
No.
Jim, did you wanna go ahead and, add to your comments?
I don't wanna add to that comment. I'd be happy to express to the board how we probably got here. A building application for a permit application requires that a site plan be part of that submittal. what I take are clear setbacks with numbers, or a situation where a building window is drawn in, and the building window is just the area of building allowed within the lot. The submittal clearly showed the building to be within the building window, met my criteria for review, permits granted. Work's going on, I've known Jason Labonte for a long time, work's going on, everything's going smoothly. On April 24th at around noon, he enters my office and says, "Hey, I don't need setback." And I'm like, "Wait, this is not good. How do you know you don't need setback?" And he said he was told by the bank that their surveyors, or whoever they sent out to do these measures, claimed he might be too close.
Can I just ask, it was a mortgage survey?
It was a mortgage survey, yes. So I expressed to Jason that, I'm concerned, but I thought it would be in his best interest to have a surveyor that he hires go out and run those numbers. But it gave me a major dilemma. I don't want to put a stop work order on this based on a mortgage survey. Right, so you probably should consider stop work, obtain a survey, and move on. He says, "Jim, I'm so comfortable that it's only the garage, I want to keep going." And I said, "Well, I'm really reluctant to do this. It's not a good thing for you, it's not a good thing for me." And he said, he talked to his attorney, and his attorney was comfortable it was only the garage. I said, "Please have your attorney get me a letter stating that the responsibility for any further building, should you choose to do so, is clearly your own, until we get a survey." Long story short, he continues going on, and we receive information that his surveyor says doesn't say that. It is a garage only. He continues to do the work. At that point, and actually on the very first day, my notes indicate, he and I spoke about the possibility of a variance. I gave him my thought that it's not a good possibility. I would roll the dice on a variance. But I also told him that without seeking a variance, he couldn't go to consent agreement. He couldn't seek a consent agreement because town policy is that you exhaust all possibilities, and the first possibility would be to seek a variance. If you go to the Board of Selectmen seeking a consent agreement with a formal denial by the Zoning Board of Appeals, you've exhausted all possibilities. And I explained to him that's the only way I know of getting through this. Go back and consult with your attorney, maybe he knows something else. Variances don't look good, but without one, we can't even talk about consent agreement because it's town policy. And that's how we got here too.
Thank you. Jason, anything you'd like to close with, based on what's been
I do
presented?
know that, in your town ordinance, the ZBA does have the ability to grant up to a 20% variance. In this particular situation, we would need 20%, it'd be 9%, which is substantially less than, and about, less than half of, what you guys are allowed to do. So basically, we're just here tonight to say, we realize we messed up. This isn't something, that we're taking lightly. We're putting things in place, to prevent this from ever happening again. And we're basically sitting in front of you asking, if we can get that 9% variance, to correct the situation, so my customers don't have to have a 3-foot smaller garage. We don't feel that it's gonna hinder anything in the neighborhood. Like Jeff had mentioned, other houses further down the street will be able to be closer to the road than we are. We don't see how this is gonna affect the town in any way at all. Houses that were built 40 years ago, are dozens of feet closer to the road. than what we're asking. You know, we're not asking to say, hey, you want to be 30 feet closer to a road. It's, you know, it's 4.5 feet with a roof overhang. It's a pretty minimal request, considering there's 50 feet to start. There's other zones further down the road that only require 25. You know, I realize these things are in place for a certain reason. I'm just pointing out that we're not hindering, we're not making any safety issues, we're not doing anything that's gonna hurt the city now or in the future. So we're basically just asking, you know, can we have that 9% out of the 20 that you're able to give out, you know, for this particular situation under the circumstances that we're dealing with?
Okay.
Yeah,
Last,
we're pretty much
comment.
aware of the setback variance of up to 20%. The criteria for that is you must be the property owner and it must be his year-round residence. So the applicant is clearly a developer, home innovations, so I can go there with him. But if you look at section 11.4.3, the Board of Appeals can hear this to a property owner for his primary year-round residence, when the strict application of the standard would cause an undesirable change. So, you know, clearly that, but it doesn't qualify in my opinion.
No, I understand, and if one shares that reading of it, then this is strictly, to get to the next step, where the selectmen have greater flexibility than we do.
And just if I can be lawyerly for a moment and talk
Please.
about the procedural aspect of that.
Do we wanna close the public comment period, and then you can do that?
Or you might wanna keep it open in case they have a response to what I might say, it's entirely up to you.
Okay.
Shall I proceed?
Please.
Okay, so absolutely, there is that contemplated setback variance for a detached single-family dwelling. But, that said, that is not what has been applied for, and that is not what was noticed. I'm less concerned about what we're talking about here. What I am concerned about, and this is very lawyerly, but it's really important and could be a basis for appeal. I'm dealing with that in another town at this very moment. So, here's my concern. The as part of this, any variance application, any Board of Appeal application, abutters must be notified. And my understanding is there's a list of abutters, the abutters have been notified, but the notice that they were provided with, I imagine, is to consider a general variance application, not a setback, single-family dwelling variance application. And one might say, well, who cares, what's the big deal? Here's what could be argued. If I were an attorney for an abutter who looked at this notice, the whole point of notice is basically, am I safe to stay away tonight? Is something, and you know, like Jim had said earlier, generally speaking, most people who are live to variance issues know that they're very difficult to get. They're very rarely granted. If you look at the standards for the single-family setback variance, those are, one could argue, and I think that's true, and that's actually why they're there, is that they're a little bit less stringent, they're a little bit easier to get. So if an abutter knew, this is hypothetical, but if they were saying, it's a standard variance, they're not gonna get it, I'm not gonna bother coming out tonight, as opposed to they realize, okay, this single-family variance is a little bit easier to get, then they might have changed their mind and they might have come and said, no, and said their piece. So again, I know that's very technical and it's very procedural, but, as the town attorney, I've gotta say that there wasn't notice of that kind of variance. If they want to make that request, there's always the possibility of withdrawing this request and, asking for a different kind of variance. But as far as the notice provision goes, I think that that's a real issue that you've gotta consider, when you decide whether or not you're gonna move forward, or if the applicant wants to move forward with this particular application, or if they wanna withdraw it and make a different application. And again, I'm not advising anybody here except for this board. If the applicant decides, look, either one of them, they're gonna be hard to get, and we just wanna get in front of the selectmen, that's our goal, then they may decide, hey, we're just gonna move forward. But, if they want you to consider that 20% and the variance under the single-family dwelling setback variance criteria, then I think we need to really consider whether or not we move forward tonight. Because if they're asking for you to look at those criteria, then that's a different ball of wax, so.
I know we got a list of abutters, did we see what actually went to them? Was that in the package?
Yep. You should have gotten the notice.
I think, I'm looking at the packet and it says the notice of public hearing. Wendy, can we assume that this is what went to the abutters
Yes.
along with the application?
No application, just the notice.
Okay, but it does say you are hereby notified that there will be a hearing on the application for a general
General
variance.
variance,
Correct.
yes.
Into general variance, in definition, when you say general,
Mhm.
means all variances?
I wouldn't say so. I would say a general variance is, you have the standard variance criteria, and then you have other kinds of variances, which are specifically a disability variance, a setback variance for detached single-family housing, and a variance for telecommunication facilities. So the general variance is that standard criteria, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is,
So you're cautioning us that if we were to grant a variance, an abutter could come back and possibly, have grounds to appeal?
no, let me be even more clear. If you granted a variance under the general criteria,
Mhm.
no abutter could come back based on a failure to notify them properly. They couldn't do that. But if you granted the variance based on
Based on the single family?
the
Single
other
family.
criteria,
Thanks.
they could say that, yeah.
And that's
Okay.
the issue he brought up. the
Right, and
20%.
so I think maybe this board needs to clarify from the applicant, are you asking for a general variance, or are you asking for the single-family kind of variance? Cause you had mentioned the 20%, and so that's what I think we need to clarify.
Well, yeah, I wasn't aware there's like different variance things that we can come to when we're going to ZBA, and nobody informed me of anything like that. They said, here, fill out this application when we get in front of ZBA. Obviously, this is a setback issue, so, why would it be issued as a general variance if this is specifically for a setback? This whole meeting today should have been specifically set up for a setback variance.
Well,
Well, that's not really
I
true.
think that, and again, I don't wanna debate, I just will talk about what the general law says. And the general law says that folks are deemed to know what the ordinances say and to follow them. And, I think that you've had counsel in the past, and, I think that, I don't wanna get back and forth about,
Sure.
No.
but the ordinance says what it says has very specific criteria. I do not know whether or not there are different applications for different kinds of variances. That's something I don't know the answer to that question. But if we're gonna be hyper, diligent, which, that's my job to encourage you to be that,
Yes, yes.
that, what you have applied for, and when I say you, I'm saying home, whatever the applicant is, the criteria here are the general variance criteria, they're not the criteria for that single family. So,
I was unaware, basically, I asked to basically set up a meeting in front of ZBA. It's the form they gave me, it's the form I filled out.
The general variance covers setbacks, it just covers a lot of other things as well. Deviation setback requirements, dimensional requirements for lot frontage, lot area, height, structure size, lot coverage and open space requirements. So the general variance covers setback as well. A single family dwelling setback variance would not cover any of those other issues. It's a very specific thing for a very specific circumstance, that is a year-round primary residence of the property owner.
right, so from a practical perspective, maybe what, would be beneficial for everybody, both the applicant and this board, not that we don't enjoy each other's company tremendously, but, one of the things you might want to do is, if the applicant thinks that this 20% single-family setback, variance is what they wanna go for, and they need to come back for that, for everybody's benefit, you may wanna do that analysis that, Jim, code enforcement officer, pointed out, whether or not, if they did come back and say, oh, wait, we wanna switch and we wanna do that other kind, whether or not they'd be eligible for it in the first place. That way, nobody's time is wasted, and,
Well,
yeah.
we can't do the other kind can only be submitted by the homeowner, right?
That's my point.
Correct.
So,
Right.
That's the criteria.
The discussion's pointless, right? 'Cause
Yes.
Well, I mean, but.
we're the homeowner and we can't be the
I understand
homeowner
that,
until
but
we
this
get
is-
a occupancy permit, which we can't get until, so I mean, that option isn't even a,
Well, you're arguing, yes, I think, I agree with you, but
Right.
I'm not the fact finder, these folks
yeah,
are,
I'm just
so.
saying that.
No,
The issue of
if
the
Jason
20%,
applies for the
which is-
single-family dwelling
Yeah.
setback
No
variance,
asking for
But he can't,
he wouldn't meet the
Yeah.
right,
criteria.
he can't, he's not the homeowner that lives there
that.
year
That's
round.
the issue.
No,
Well, he could apply for it and get turned down, and possibly get to the board of selectmen.
I don't think it would exhaust all his avenues. I think he'd have to come back under the general variance, for which he could apply.
Okay, well, we,
Where we
Who's
are
on
already.
first?
Where we are already.
okay, then perhaps we should, go over the criteria of the
Yeah.
general variance after we close the
Yes, I
There you
think
go.
we should exactly.
comment period.
One thing I wanna just look at, okay, because I don't wanna prejudice anybody here, is that I know there's a provision in the ordinance that says repetitive appeals or requests. So let's look at that, because what I don't wanna have happen is somebody, coming back again and we say, oops, sorry, the ordinance doesn't allow you to do that. So let's read that, okay? There's a provision that says, repetitive appeals, board of appeals may not consider a second appeal of the same or similar nature for the same property within 2 years of the date of denial.
Which paragraph is that?
I'm at the very last one, 11.7.
11.
Oh, there you are, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Arguably, this board has authority to consider administrative appeals and also variances. So maybe the interpretation there is that a variance is not an appeal per se, but let's, make sure.
It's pretty limited.
Yeah, I think that, let's put it this way. I would opine, if asked, that, an appeal, not appeal, a variance request by XYZ Co. under a general variance criteria is not the same as a request by John Doe homeowner for, the single-family dwelling, variance criteria. I think there's enough distinguishing factors there that would allow this board to entertain it. However, that's my opinion, but you could have some abutter have an issue with that. I think that's pretty remote though.
May
Please?
I often wonder when we talk about this, the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant, which would be the new homeowner, or the prior owner.
Right.
So if we get into these weeds.
Yes, I mean, I can opine, I can give you some law on that issue, because the self-created hardship criteria, which is, I think, part of both, either,
It is.
regardless of which one you're coming under, again, you are the finder of fact in this case, and so I can tell you what I think, but the decision is ultimately yours, but I will put it out, and again, this is for the sake of efficiency, right? So that if they end up coming back and the criteria are the same, and you might not be inclined to grant it for the similar reasons, we should probably flesh that out a little bit, just for everybody's benefit. So, were we to, and this is very hypothetical, all right, but were we to consider the single-family detached dwelling variance, as Jim says, one of the criteria is, it says the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or prior owner. Okay, that's the classic self-created hardship. Basically, in a crass way, you messed up, you gotta bear the brunt of your bad decision, okay? Now, query whether that's the applicant, but a prior owner, whether the prior owner has to basically bear the brunt of prior mistakes. The answer on that piece is a little less clear, okay? So there's a lot of case law out there that used to be, if you knew about it, you're holding the bag, doesn't matter. But it's a little bit more refined. There's this case, Twig versus Kennebunkport and, I think it's the Bishop case, that basically say, it used to be that, like I said, if you knew about a change in the zoning, then you were out of luck. Now, it's not the case, that just because you knew that zoning changed, that you're caught. But this isn't about a change in a zoning ordinance, this is about a mistake. And to me, in my mind, those are different things. And so if a mistake was made, as opposed to they just had the poor luck of the zoning changing on them, say, it used to be that the setback was 25 feet, now it's 50, and they knew about that, that's not self-created hardship under the case law. Whether or not the applicant, knowing that this mistake was made, that could still be self-created hardship. I think this board could find that. That's just one of the criteria. I mean, you also look at the last criteria, and again, I'm still talking about the single-family variance. One of them is that the granting of the variance is based on demonstrated need, not convenience, and no other feasible alternative is available. Again, I will say that the applicant has not asked for you to consider that tonight, but if this board has a very strong feeling that the applicant, if they had applied under that other, wouldn't make it anyway, it seems to me that out of courtesy and everybody's, respect for everybody's time, you might wanna talk about that. If the goal is ultimately just to get in front of the selectmen in the first place.
I guess I'd like to know what everybody else's thoughts and feelings on the whole entire situation, which either direction if we went in, once.
Because I wouldn't, I
mean,
would caution
obviously-
the board to go through an analysis of both, because that is not what is before you. What is before you and what has been properly noticed is the general variance criteria. I'm holding in my hand the application, the applicant has filled that application out, that is what is before you. What I'm trying to do is just be practical, that if there was an inclination on behalf of the homeowners, or you have I don't think you're a homeowner yet, you have a purchase and sale agreement, correct? That if they were inclined to come before you, if it might be an exercise in futility, it seems like we should maybe run that up the flagpole. But if they did want to, I would strongly recommend there be a do-over in notice, and so that anybody who has a concern, who is an abutter, would have the opportunity to weigh in on those different criteria. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But now to be fair to Jason, since he wants some information, should we close the public comment period and discuss
I think that would be appropriate. We're
that?
not- yes.
And then he still has an opportunity to withdraw or
Yes.
resubmit?
Yes, I think that's fair.
That'd be great, please.
Okay, and, public comment is closed, and, it's, I was focused on that single, dwelling variance, those criteria, perhaps incorrectly. But, it seems to me that, we can certainly discuss it in detail, but it seems to me that there's no way we're gonna get to yes under those criteria.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Paul.
On the general,
No,
No. On the-
on the single fam,
Yeah, and you know what, I maybe could make it actually easier, because truly, there is a verbatim, almost identical criteria under both. Okay, so the,
They're
under,
close, except the homeowner, the primary residence piece would, knock them out right away. it
right,
seems
right,
to
I
me.
understand that, but what I think we're talking about is that self-created hardship criteria, which is the same under
Yes.
both. So if that is something that you're concerned about, that if they can't make it under one, they're not gonna make it under the
Right.
other, regardless of the other concerns. Because something very important to understand in these variance criteria, which I'm sure you do understand, it's not a or, it's an and. Every single one of those
Understood.
criteria
Right.
must be met in order to get across the finish line. So, if we're talking about the issue about self-created hardship, that I'm looking under, back to the single-family dwelling variance, it says, number 3, the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. Under the general application, it says,
Same thing?
same thing.
exactly right.
It's number 4.
So if that is a concern as to one, it will be concerned as to the other.
Understood.
Yes.
I had a hard time with that one on the last issue that we, took up, and I think it's very restrictive. I mean, if someone sees it differently, please,
No, I think it is
please
very,
go ahead.
I think it is very restrictive, I would agree with you, it seems to me that if you, in this case, the action was almost a case of not action, in other words, a careful survey wasn't done,
Understood.
then, that's the responsibility of the applicant in this particular case, it seems to me.
It was different in the other application, that was not.
Yeah, well, we don't, yeah,
We
we
don't
don't need to
go.
discuss that.
No, we don't want to, but you
We
brought
don't
it up,
need to
and
discuss
it
that,
was
but,
totally, to
the
me, it was a
criteria are
different
the same.
criteria.
This, to me, it's almost saying, hey, zoning board, these are your, rules and you must follow them, and common sense is reserved for the selectmen.
Yes, I think that's.
Oversimplifying, but, I think our authority is, very limited
I think
here.
that's well said. You have the criteria, you've been presented with facts, it's your job to decide whether or not those facts convince you that these criteria are met. And if you decide that they are not, then it goes back to the selectmen. So, again, this is your process, this is your night, but if you want to go through the general variance criteria and make those determinations, then
Well, that's what we're here to
Yeah.
do tonight.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
think.
I think we should do that with the, I think there's agreement that we wouldn't get there under the single family dwelling.
Hmm.
And I don't think in good faith we should recommend that someone come back for that.
And can I just put a point on that, is that specifically, you haven't gone through all the criteria, but is it largely based on the self-created hardship issue that, why?
Well, I'm only speaking for myself at this point, but, because of the, primary residence requirement, I wouldn't even get to the other five.
Okay,
Yes, I would agree with Paul on that. Yeah.
So let's go through the,
It'd be different if they were,
criteria.
No,
Well,
they're not.
they can't,
They don't own it, so they can't.
right.
get to that point yet, so. So why don't we take a look at the, five for the general. The land in question cannot yield a reasonable return unless the variance is granted. I don't really have a problem with, agreeing with that one.
No, I don't think any of us do, I think that's,
You wanna
Can
do
I-
the thing?
yeah, I do need to just, again, talk about what that means at law, because as you very eloquently put, sometimes common sense and the law are not necessarily one and the same. So at law, when it talks about cannot yield a reasonable return, that doesn't mean, and the cases say it over and over again, maximum return does not equal reasonable return. And so, and the examples in case law are, okay, maybe you can't get a reasonable return if you can't build a house, but that doesn't mean you have to be able to have a garage or a deck or a patio or, you know, it's a very stringent criteria. That what you know, it doesn't have to be the biggest house, the best house with all the accoutrements, it just needs to be something that gives you a reasonable return. So, that is a pretty stringent criteria, even though the way it sounds there, isn't that, because arguably a house could be built on that lot. It's
Yeah.
just,
Yes, this lot allows a house to be built with some ease. It can, so we're not, it's not restricted in that respect.
Well, I mean, we visited the site this evening, and looking at how much this gentleman has already invested into it, I don't think he can get a reasonable return based on,
Yeah, but the question is, he shouldn't have invested that money with the house in the wrong place on the lot. That's really what it comes down to.
well, okay, maybe we don't agree on this one, but,
one thing I will say is that, for example, the MMA manual on variances, and you can reopen the public hearing if you'd like to hear from, but let me just finish this legal point, is that the consideration that you're doing, whether reasonable return, and all of these criteria should be made based on requesting the variance before the work is done.
Okay.
Yes.
So, these after-the-fact variances, arguably, you don't consider these criteria based on what they did mistakenly, you make these determinations based on had they come to you prior to making the mistake.
Thank you for the clarification. I will go ahead and reopen if you had something to add there, Jim.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that so everybody knows that when the issue was brought forward to us, the garage was constructed. You know, what we had moved forward on specifically was in the house. The garage hasn't been touched since that's been brought to our attention. As you see, you're down there today, there's no garage doors on the front of that house. And, you know, we would love to have put them on months ago, so people just can't walk into the house whenever they want to. Just to be clear, that nothing in that garage has been, you know, done, we haven't done nothing to it since this issue has been brought to our attention.
Okay, I will close the read again and go back to our discussion. Based on guidance from council, I guess I read that differently. Or
It's
I
totally your
I
prerogative.
understand it
Yeah,
differently.
yeah,
But, then, any further discussion on number one?
So just procedurally speaking, ultimately you take a vote up or down whether or not you grant the ordinance, whether you grant the variance, but each and every one of the criteria,
I was planning to vote on
You
this
have to
one.
vote.
you bet, yes.
Yeah, okay. How many feel that criteria one is met? Criterion one is met? If it's not met,
I would vote that it was not met.
I would vote that it was not met.
I would too.
4-0, unfortunately, it's not met. Need for variance is due to unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions of the neighborhood.
And I don't think this has any particular issues as a unique property. There's not some archaeological wonder just behind it that pushed the house forward, for example, that we're trying to preserve, or something like that.
Okay?
So I don't feel that is, there's a unique, I don't feel there is a unique circumstance, it would be my feeling about that.
I would agree with Steve on that.
I agree too.
Then criterion number 2, who thinks that it's met? Who thinks that it's not met?
Oh, yes.
And can I just ask for, we vote on it, but we need to have facts to say why not, and I think you said that there's no, in your mind, not any architectural, archaeological.
All similar
Yeah,
things. Archaeological is just an example I could think of.
any other things that, would bear on that?
It's, little owls nesting somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's asking about the
Yeah.
actual shape of the lot, whether it's
Yes.
wet or ledge or.
There were no unique circumstances identified.
No.
Number 3, granting of the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality.
I would agree with that.
I would
If
too.
it would not alter the essential locality, granting the variance.
Do we need supporting rationale for saying yes? Based on the sidewalk, I am comfortable that this does not alter the essential character of the area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and.
Because similar homes are built similar distances
Distances
from the
away.
road, that kind of thing, is that, I'm not putting words in your mouth,
No,
I'm just
but
trying
I-
to get details.
No, I understand, yeah, that's valid, it wasn't,
Some are farther back. some
wasn't
are
out of
closer.
place with, how others are situated.
You said some are as close, some are further, some are.
Well, that's really not the case. There's only, I think, 2 or 3 houses on the side away from the eastern trail that you can compare with, and I think they are all set back quite a ways further from the
I can
road.
define the locality
house
as
in
a
question.
little bit further down the street.
Well, I still don't think you're gonna find anything really similar if you go further down the street.
Certainly not as far as West Lang, and beyond that, I think.
And I mean, beyond that, you're really not in the locality.
No, I agree with that. And you come the other way.
Well, then, any further discussion? Who believes that number 3 is met?
I would agree with that, too.
So, just so I understand that you agree that it will not.
Right.
So in this one, it's in favor of the applicant?
Right.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You wanna skip to 5?
You wanna skip to 5? Sure.
Just a question.
Yeah, okay. 5, based on clear and convincing evidence presented by the applicant, the proposed use would not cause unsafe or unhealthful or nuisance conditions.
Okay, oh, no.
Well, I
Yeah,
don't,
I would, based on the sidewalk, I'm comfortable that, there's enough room to turn around, he showed us how he was gonna, fix the
Yeah.
driveway, so there'd be, people wouldn't have to back out.
yeah, I think, I don't think, I'd find in favour of the applicant on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's 4-0 in favor on criterion number 5. Back up to number 4, the hardship is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. And we had some discussion, we can have more if you like, but, even coming in, the gentleman said that, hey, we messed up and we're seeking relief.
Yeah, I think, this doesn't,
This is a hard one
it is very difficult.
to satisfy. Comments or discussion?
I think this one is black and white. I sympathize with you, but this one is on you.
yes, I absolutely agree with that.
Anyone vote that this condition is met? Not met?
Well, I'd like to say, it's a kind of a hardship, but we discussed hardship and, because the definition that we got for hardship, I'm gonna have to agree with the rest of you that it was not met.
Okay. Oh, we're not, no one's saying it's not a hardship.
It is a hardship, but
And-
not the way they
and,
define it.
And maybe off the record, I hope the selectmen, grant some relief.
Yeah, definitely.
But we're not in a position to do so.
I wish I could do that.
Like I said, I sympathize, but we're kinda locked in by these criteria.
That's the problem.
And, you might have, the selectmen definitely got more flexibility, whether or not they go along with you is their decision. It's just not for us to say, but we have to go by these 5 items, and I think on 2 or 3 of them, you're holding the bag.
This is not public, so I'm gonna address this to Jim, so you don't have to open up public comment again. Do all 5 of those have to be in favor of us, or just a majority?
All 5.
All 5,
Five.
okay, it has to be unanimous.
My question is, does selectmen have a lot more leave? I'm not.
Well, okay, so here's the way that works.
I'm sure you
Every
won't know.
board has the authority which it is vested with under state law, ordinance, or charter. You are a creature of statute, you are a creature of, and as you very well put, that you only can do what you are allowed to do. The selectmen have authority to deal with litigation or settle matters, and so they're not bound by the variance criteria, that's your job. They would make determinations about enforcement, Jim has enforcement authority that they have to authorize whether he should enforce things, or if they can be settled. So that's their daily work. You have done your job, except for the final motion to either grant or deny the appeal. And then you've done your job, yes.
So they can move on once they've
Yeah, they're not
Yeah.
bound by these criteria.
Yeah, make sure you go this way.
Based on the,
She's down.
voting on the
Okay,
individual,
yeah, right, you're welcome. Good night.
we should now vote on whether to,
Do you want to propose a motion?
I don't think we need a motion. But I think we,
I think you do need a
Because
motion.
I think
Well, you need a
motion,
motion,
I would propose that this application for a variance fails because it fails to meet all 5 of the required criteria.
any comment or discussion?
I'll second it.
Second, okay. All in favor? Unanimous?
Okay, so as far as procedure goes, I think that your procedure requires that a decision be made, I mean, you've made the decision is made. If you would like, I will draft up your findings of fact and conclusions based on the conversations that, and deliberations and the facts that were presented here. Those need to be signed, at a public meeting, or at least reviewed and approved at a public meeting. So I don't know, this isn't a board that regularly, you have a meeting date every month, or do you?
No, we do
No.
not.
Okay,
We do not.
We
So-
have done that by email in the past to, come to agreement.
yeah, I think, again, as far as, you know, the technical stuff goes, is that findings should, especially because I'm writing them, they should be reviewed at a public meeting. If there are changes, they shouldn't be discussed via email, so
Okay.
I think, as much as I hate to say it, I think you need to have another meeting just to consider and I don't need to be here, I'll give it to you, and you decide, you know,
That's
that's
fine.
commas in the wrong place, or that's not
That's
even
fine.
remotely what we said,
Okay.
you make your changes.
Can,
Yeah,
can these people proceed to go to the Board of Selectmen?
I think
Prior
that's
to
fair,
that?
you know what the vote is, and they can ask the selectmen to do
Because
that.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to hold them up just for that.
Oh, for the final notes.
Yeah, I think everybody knows what the decision is, and they can talk to the selectmen after that.
Next Monday, they have a meeting, Wendy?
Yes.
Yeah, I would be, getting in front of them.
Yes, they will know our decision, even though it's not formally entered
Correct.
into the town record at this stage.
Will
Might
they,
wanna
will
talk to
they
some-
be able to make a decision, however, without having the signed
Oh, yeah,
decision
notes?
here? Or is that going to?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what the Board of Selectmen will say, they might say, hey, I wanna see the reasons, but I think that, for example, an appeal of a decision of, say you were to appeal this decision, you wanted to go to court on that, it's very clear, I'm not saying you do, but I'm reasoning by analogy here. It says that you must take an appeal within 30 days, the decision is rendered. The decision is rendered, so you know what the decision is, you know the reasons for it, you didn't meet the criteria. The minutes will be available, you know, in draft form, so I don't think that by not having written findings, that will preclude the Board of Selectmen to start discussing the consent agreement. I don't think that would be an
But will
impediment
it
to them.
prevent them from finalizing
Would
the
it,
consent?
Well, sure, but a consent agreement still has to be drafted and, you know, I don't know who would be drafting that, so I don't think that you get in front of a selectman one night and everything's
Yeah.
annexed in
I
paper.
mean,
and-
they
but you
won't
can
hand you
certainly
the
start-
document, but
you can
it
certainly start the
seems like
process.
they could come to a decision, which
Well,
would
we
be very helpful.
usually have a
Would
meeting
it,
pretty quickly after decision.
would it help if, one of
Findings
us
of
attended
fact.
the meeting?
Sure. I
It
can't see
probably
why it
wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, nothing would hurt. Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean,
So just, the reason that I'm asking is that we live in Saco now, we've sold our house,
hey,
closing's July 5th.
you
So-
gotta get this squared away.
So we've got kind of a short time frame between now and July 5th where we won't have any place to live.
Well, I would strongly suggest that you go down to the town hall tomorrow and let them know what's in the works, so that if nothing else, you can at least get on the agenda for the selectmen on Monday.
We're already on the agenda for
Oh, you are?
Monday, yeah.
Oh, you are,
Good.
okay. You've already
So
talked
just-
with,
I think,
Keith?
aren't we, Jason?
Yeah, we anticipated that this might not go well,
Yeah.
so we had
Well, I
back
think it
up.
went well, it just didn't
Yeah,
go your way.
I mean, obviously, you know, we're hoping, you know, that this could go, that there might be some relief or whatever, but obviously we realize, your criteria that you're trying to meet, and you're kinda handcuffed to a lot of the, decisions that you can and cannot do. So we had kinda put something in the works just because of the limited timeframe that we're in, just to kinda cover ourselves as much as we possibly can and try to keep everything moving along as smoothly as we possibly could as well.
What time is that meeting?
So,
7.
Yeah,
Do they meet here or somewhere?
Yeah,
Seven.
right here.
Right here?
I mean, if we could be any help to the applicant, might be good to do that.
I'm just thinking that, he said, you don't know what questions they might have, or,
Yeah. So Monday?
Appreciate it.
Sure.
And do you want to set a meeting to have these findings
Yeah.
reviewed? I don't know.
Sure. Or,
And again, if I were asked by the selectmen, I'm sure they would ask me, but if they did, I would certainly say that not having written findings would not preclude them from entering into an agreement with you.
How soon do you anticipate having these ready?
I could, I could get them done by, well, I could get you a draft by Monday, but you'd have to call a meeting and approve them, but if that would be helpful in the process of saying, hey, selectmen, we have draft findings here.
Is that enough time for a public meeting? Does that give enough notice?
I don't think you have to, it's not like it's a public hearing, so there aren't strict timelines that you have to, I don't think that you're gonna have time to have a meeting before Monday. But I could have draft findings for you, so at least the selectmen would know that those findings are in the works, and it's just a matter of you folks meeting to review and approve them.
Right.
So maybe it makes sense to just set your meeting date now if you can, and then, at least you'll have draft findings by that meeting, and the selectmen will know that you're going to be meeting and approving them.
Right, so I wanna repeat what I thought I heard you say,
Sure.
just so that I'm
Yeah,
understanding in
understood.
case the selectmen ask you.
Yep.
Based upon the decision here tonight,
Mhm.
you believe that the selectmen can enter into a consent agreement if they choose to?
Yeah, the
Based
fact that there
upon
aren't written
without
findings
having-
would not preclude.
Okay, that's, I just wanted to
If they
make sure.
ask me
Yeah.
that question, that's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would anybody be amenable to meeting, say, 4 o'clock on Monday, so that these folks have got a signed draft to go to the selectmen's meeting with?
I'd have no problem with that,
I don't either.
I don't
That'd be
think-
kind of,
without checking
if
the
that's gonna
calendar.
help them any.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would love to be able to get you some by the end of business on Friday. I can't
Can you?
promise, I will try. If not, I'll get them to you over the weekend at some point. And then you, at least will have them some jump time to
well, I mean,
review
if we
for Monday.
met at 4 o'clock on Monday,
Yeah.
we'd have all day Monday to work
Okay.
on it too.
All right, so Monday morning, if I get them to you by then, again, best efforts by end of business Friday. I'm not sure if I can do that, but I'll try my level best to do that.
But you're okay with Monday?
That you have a meeting?
Yeah, that you have the,
Oh, you'll have them by Monday.
okay.
Yes, yeah. And Wendy or whomever does the notices should post on the website and wherever else you post meetings. you
Done.
know.
I'll take care
Yeah.
of that.
Like
I'll post the one
ASAP,
outside the office.
ASAP, just because, this is quick turnaround.
Where should we do that? Probably not here at 4 o'clock.
No.
Yeah, because I have to request the space and everything, so I won't
No,
have
no,
that
no,
answer.
Don't do that.
No.
We'll have to meet at the town office upstairs in Jim's office.
That will be all
Is
right.
that okay?
Okay.
with
Oh, that's
you?
fine, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
Do
So
we have
4
any
o'clock.
other business?
that's it.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
Thank you.
I've never seen that motion ever be not unanimous.
yes.
No, I'm gonna stay. All in favor? Approved? All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. You'll get through this.
Oh, I hope it works well.
So I'm gonna go this way, let's-
So,
What's that?
let's-
Someone's asking something, you might-